how to still make it, how to better, still better make a better product, and yet retain the quality and reliability for the provider of that product out there. I give you a couple of examples. On the provider side, this is dangerous as a supplier on the provider. On the provider side, carrying 6 different bottles of concentrators is not a very cost-effective way of running the business. Having put out 25 different power wheelshells from different brands, with different chassis, with different motors, with different parts, is not a very cost-effective model. I know that most of us that have a car with a brand, you go to the dealer that carries that brand. How can you be cost-effective when you have this multitude of products and then think you're going to serve, or the expectation level for the beneficiary is that he or she gets service in an instant way and cost-effective way? That model will disappear. Likewise, on the supplier side, on the manufacturing side, we are clearly reducing the number of chassis so that we have fewer chassis with fewer components or common components for the provider in order for the provider to have a more cost-effective model to deal with. So the takeaway that I want you to have from this is that it is a provider and a supplier game together. The customer cannot expect to cut the prices in half by the manufacturer. And the manufacturer can't do that anymore. What is important from the manufacturing side is what I talked to you about, the products, and also the other part is to provide services to the supplier to run their businesses more cost effectively, or to handle things that are not the core competency of a supplier, but that you then outsource. It's kind of a controversial word sometimes, that you outsource to someone, to a supplier, that consolidate some of these functions into a larger unit and be more cost effective. So it has to come from both sides.
Great, thank you. Mark, just maybe some examples of how you as a provider has, over the years and into the future, has embraced technology or has used it in your day-to-day with patients. That'd be pretty helpful to understand.
Sure. Well, we've been more of a traditional model of respiratory home care. Our model has been driving costs out of our business for the last 10 years. Everything that we could do to push costs down. We've embraced a liquid to gas transfilling model that reduces the cost of our portable oxygen filling cylinders to pennies rather than dollars. We've embraced hydrostat testing for our oxygen cylinders in-house, which reduces our hydrostat testing costs by about 2/3. Conserving devices were another great advance in the market, and those have just gotten better and better over the years. Going forward, the real limitation to new technologies is reimbursement, as these other gentlemen have attested to. It represents a very limiting factor in what new technologies can be brought to market and what new technologies providers can embrace. Anything that we look at from this day forward has to be something that either holds the line on cost or reduces our costs through gain efficiencies in some way. There was a day when new technologies would come out, even with a fixed reimbursement rate, and the cost of the technology was higher. We would embrace that because we wanted it for our patients, because we were in a competitive market environment that we didn't want our competitors to have an edge either. So we pay an extra $100 for a CPAP unit because it had some bells and whistles on it that the prior model didn't have. But in the environment coming January 1, those days I think are pretty much over. Those providers will not have the kind of margin where they can just keep up in the ante with a fixed reimbursement rate. They will have to find some way from a business perspective to justify every purchase they make. And at least that's how we're going to approach it.
That's great, thanks, Mark. So Joe, to kind of wrap up on this question, you've heard the answers to the panelists. What is, for you, on your point of view on the technology and how to embrace it, how to work with the provider to get to that level to use it properly?
I think the panel's up, answered a lot of those questions. I think to Mark's point and others, with reimbursement setting the model first, we've been a reimbursement-driven industry, and most of healthcare has been a reimbursement-driven industry, and our behaviors are in response to that. In the near term, I don't see us getting paid for advanced features and benefits, even though, to JV's point, there's lots of things out there that we could already, that are ready to be installed in the technology that would enhance patient opportunity for self-management, that would probably start to play a role in improving clinical outcomes, clearly improve self-management of day-to-day activities or their clinical care, but because there's no mechanism for reimbursement and those costs might be high, we don't focus much of our energy on that right now. I mean, it's there, but we can't put a lot of energy. So as I look at the technology today, from a respiratory therapy standpoint in particular, we do about 75% of the things in the home, close to 80% of things in the home that are done in the hospital today. So as we look to the technology, what I think is critical in the near term is as we advance the technology, it's got to balance the two or three things that are critical. One is table stakes are it's got to be clinically effective, and that's the minimum to get in. And some of that's even cloudy because there's not a lot of evidence throughout many of these therapies and procedures that guide us in that. But at a minimum, you go into this with best clinical intentions in mind, and then the balance of cost effectiveness, which is twofold. One is what's perceived in the price, and that's the simplest one to look at and make a judgment on, but more so from a cost management standpoint. So as I look at, if we look at things, something as simple as a concentrator at this point, being able to move from routine maintenance from every month to every quarter to every 6 months to now, in our most recent move, every 3 years for a device that's got a self-monitoring system. We've put intelligence in the design now, so we've eliminated in that particular case, for example, about 5 home visits in a 3-year window that would normally have to be done by a person to go out and check a piece of equipment that we've replaced with technology. So I think the role that we see technology in the near term is to eliminate a lot of what I consider non-value added tasks, things that had to be done that didn't really add any value to the patient or really any value to your company. And I think delivery was the first and foremost example because it was the most expensive example. I think Luke Hoffman was just recently quoted in one of the trade articles talking about the impact of non-delivery in his business, and the single biggest cost was delivery, and that was an obvious one to eliminate. But there's lots of other non-value added processes, and I think the technology's role is to eliminate those while we balance the care and at least meet the minimum, but I think there's an opportunity to even improve on that. And then obviously playing against the economics that exist out there, and again, the bar keeps getting lower in that capacity, so it makes it a bigger challenge.
Great, thank you. I'd like to stick to what Joel and Mark Auckerman was saying about reducing costs, some of the problems with the payment system, and then if also Luke could chime in at the end. And you can answer either one of these. What is the biggest thing that a provider can do to make his business more efficient? Or what have you seen that is a common mistake that a provider makes in his day-to-day business? Mark or Joel?
I'll take a shot at it. Our efforts over the last 10 years, and I think everybody's in the business today, has been singularly focused on reducing costs in their business. And it's difficult to name a single thing that would be more of a panacea, but if I had to pick one, I would say it would be on the information technology side. Reducing the amount of days it takes from the time you provide a service to the time you get paid for that service is going to be critical going forward. We're going to be dealing with such narrow margins under the competitive bidding reimbursement that even a change of 2, 3, 4 days can have a significant impact on cash flow. So if I had to advise anybody on one thing to focus on, it would be make sure you've got those processes in place, that you're paperless where you can be, that you're electronic to all of your payer sources, and that you do a very thorough job of your intake so you're not chasing stuff upstream later. I'll pass it on to Phil.
I don't want to sound presumptuous of other providers, but there's been a hesitancy among providers to invest in the technology that Mark was talking about, or investing in home bill, or investing in a number of different technology-based items because reimbursement is so uncertain. When you play in a market that you don't know what your pricing is going to be 6 months or a year from now, how can you logically make a long-term investment? That being said, you have no choice but to make the long-term investment in the IT infrastructure and things like home bill. I mean, the biggest challenge I see ahead of us, though, as an industry, is the audit issue that what Medicare's lame attempt at fraud and abuse protection. They keep layering different items in there, and we've given them the answers, we've offered them solutions, and last week we got a notification that, by the way, in 2007, we paid you for something when the patient was in a nursing home. Well, our records didn't show it, and it didn't show it because Medicare's records weren't up to date at the time. So how are we supposed to know? We call the patient, they answer, do you have the oxygen? Yes. We get a denial today with the take back from over 2 years ago because they say the patient was in a nursing home, but their records at that time didn't say it. They're just starting to put the records together. We're subject to a take back on it, and we're not talking $100 or $1,000. This is multi. That is our biggest risk going forward, and probably technology is one way that we can use to help keep our files clean and using upgraded IT technologies. But that's one of the biggest risks in the industry right now, in my opinion.
Lou, could you add to that as far as, I mean, with all your visits, you know, throughout the years, what do you see as a common mistake or a common issue that providers need to overcome, or what's going to be most effective in helping building their business platform?
I think first and foremost is that facing reality for providers, no different than facing reality for manufacturers. Like mentioned, how long it takes between the beginning of the process of the patient prescription to getting their product out